What is going on, guys? Welcome to this Python tutorial series for intermediates. In today's episode, we're going to talk about sockets. So we're getting into the new field of network programming. So we're talking about how to send data over networks, how to exchange data, how to build connections between clients and servers. So this is what we're talking about right now. And the first thing that we need to know is, or the first thing that we need to learn is how to work with sockets. So let's cover the first question of what a socket basically is. A socket is just the endpoint of a communication channel. So when you have a communication in a network, you always have an endpoint, or actually you have two endpoints, and these endpoints are called sockets. So you have a server and a client, or two clients, doesn't matter. Basically two sockets that try to exchange some data. So sockets are basically just endpoints of communication channels. Now, these communications or that communication may happen in the same process, or it can happen across different continents over the internet. So sockets are not limited to a network in your home. They can also be used for the internet, for example, a very big network. Now in Python, though, we have a lot of different access levels when it comes to networking. So if we're dealing with sockets, we're always dealing with the lower levels of connectivity, you could say. So we have the connection-oriented protocol TCP and the connection-oriented, connection-less protocol, sorry, UDP. Um, if we are to use, or if we want to use some high level or higher layers, we would have to use the actual applications like FTP, HTTP, and the different modules that we have, because they would run on the application layer. We're dealing with TCP and UDP, and they run on the so-called transport layer, if you know the OC model. So this is basically what sockets are and how and on which layer we use them. And before we get too much into the theory here, let's get into the code and see how to work with sockets in Python. Now, in order to work with sockets in Python, we need to import the socket module first. So we're going ahead and saying import socket. And now we have to answer four questions. First of all, are we going to use an internet socket or a Unix socket? So this is actually a quite easy one because we're not dealing on a Unix level here. We want to have a network socket, an internet socket, so we're going to pick an internet socket. This is important because when we define a socket, we have to state what kind of socket we want. The second question is, what kind of protocol are we going to use? Are we going to use TCP or UDP? TCP is connection oriented and it's better for any sensible data. So if you want all the data to be sent and to be received, then you need TCP, but it's of course slower than UDP because with UDP you have the risk of losing some data, but UDP is way faster. So for video games, for example, for online video games, UDP, or for Skype calls, UDP is the better choice. But if you want to transfer some very accurate data, maybe TCP is a better choice. So in this case, we're going to transfer messages and we're going to use TCP. Now, the next question is which IP are we going to use? So which IP are we going to connect to, or which IP do we want to have when we host, or which IP do we want to host our server on? And the fourth question is, which port are we going to use? Are we going to use port 3333, or are we going to use 2160? Of course, we need to take care of the reserved ports and the standardized ports. So maybe port 80 is not the best idea because it's usually for HTTP. So we might want to pick a port that is not commonly used. Now, to work with sockets, the first thing is we need to create a socket, and we do this by saying socket.socket. And here we have to pass two things. First of all, which kind of socket? We already said we want to have an internet socket, so we're going to say AF underline inet. And then we have to specify the protocol. In this case, we're going to use TCP, and TCP is socket dot sock stream. Yeah. UDP would be sock underline dgram, so like that. And this right now is just a socket that works with TCP and is an internet socket. Now we can choose what we want to do with this socket. We can just connect to some other socket in the internet. If we have another program running somewhere else on a specific port, we might want to connect with the socket to this. But to learn how sockets work, we're going to create our own server here. So we're going to make our own socket that listens for input, and then we're going to create a second Python script, a client that connects to that socket. So what we do next is we use the bind method to pass a tuple of the IP address and the port that we want to run this socket on. So the IP address in this case is very simple. It's localhost because I'm running this on my own machine. So 127.0.0.1. And the port, let's pick 55555. Something like that. Now, with the bind method, we say that this is the data that we want our socket, or this is the host that we want our socket to run on. And the port, of course. So now to have a server, we just say as.listen, and this basically puts our socket into listening mode. So it's constantly listening to possible connections. Are any clients trying to connect, or is anything happening? And we're now having a listening socket. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to run an ANTless loop that accepts the connection. So we're going to say while true, and we're going to say client and address. So these are the two values that we're going to get from the function we use here in a second. Client and address are s.accept. So accept is basically the method that we want to use when a client tries to connect to the server or to the socket here, and we accept it. And this is basically what we're constantly doing because we're running accept in an ANTless loop, in a while true loop. That means that we accept every single client. So the client that we accept, we get the address as a result, and also we get a client that we can use to send information. So even though this socket here is this script here is the server script, we get a client in return, which we can use to send data to the client. So what we're going to do is we're going to print an information message here, connected to placeholder dot format, and we're going to say connected to address. And then what we're going to do is we're going to send a message. So we're going to say client dot send, and we're going to send, I don't know, you are connected. And very important, we need to encode this this message by using the dot encode method, basically with UTF-8. So that's the default. We're just saying client.send. And now we're going to say client.close, because every time we open up a new client, and once we made this little chat here with the client, we're just closing it so that we don't have unlimited clients or an unlimited amount of clients running in the background. So this is basically our server script right now. So the next thing that we're going to do is to connect to the server using a client. So we're going to make a new Python script, which is a client, and this client is going to connect to our server. So we're first going to run our server, and then we're going to run our client that connects to the server. And in this case, it won't be any, it won't be a very complicated or sophisticated interaction here. We're just going to connect to the server to get the message you are connected, and that's it. So it's not a chat, it's not a port scanner, it's not some fancy tool. It is just getting a message from a server. Now you might say that's not interesting because we already know how to print messages, but the cool thing about this here is that it works everywhere. So I can use this, I can run the server here on my computer, or actually I couldn't run it on my computer because I am not public here, but I could run this on a server, on a public server somewhere, and host it, and then someone from the other end of the world could use the client to connect to the server. So this is not something that just runs on my machine. You can use this across networks. So this is the special thing about sockets. Of course, printing messages is not anything interesting. We already know how to do that, but yeah. So now we're going to create this client.py, and we're going to create another socket here. So this is now our second script, the client script, and we're going to say import socket again. And we're going to create the same kind of socket because, of course, we have to have the same type of socket and, of course, use the same protocol. You cannot send with TCP and accept with UDP or receive with UDP. It does not work. So again, an internet socket with TCP. And now, of course, I'm not using the bind method. I'm not using the listen method because I'm not making a server. I am actually connecting to the server. So I say s.connect, and here I enter the information. In this case, as I said, it's localhost because I'm running this on my own machine. Otherwise, you would specify the IP of the public server, and the port is 55555, I think. I don't know if I have to pass a tuple here, but I think not, so I think this should be fine. But maybe we have to pass a tuple, we'll see. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to receive the message. I connect to the client, and when this succeeds, I want to get a message. I want to get the message. I want to receive the message that the client sends. So I'm saying s.receive, like this. And then I specify how many bytes I want to receive. In this case, 1024 should be enough for that message. And then I close, or actually I have to save this here into a variable if I want to read this. So I say message equals, and then I just close, and then I print message.decode. So when I now run the server here, if I've done everything correctly, maybe we'll get an error, who knows. And I run the client here, I get an error, of course, because I have to pass a tuple, as I said. Makes sense. The server is still running. I'm connecting here, and as you can see, the server got the message connected to this IP address on a different port, however. Doesn't matter. We connected with our client to our server, and we received the message, you are connected. So we established a connection from client to server. And this can be done across multiple networks. As I said, I've done this on my machine right now, but if you have a VPN tunnel, of course, you can do this from two computers that are on the opposite side of the world. So it's not a problem. And this is basically how we make a connection between sockets. So that's basically what you need to know about sockets and network programming for now. Thank you very much for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more. Of course, feel free to ask questions and give feedback in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.